Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of the Outpost. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So first and foremost, obviously picking up where last week's episode left off, it's like, oh, that pathway got opened up, and obviously Yuvala's like, oh, we're going to go down there, and she's so happy about it, she's pumped about this, but it's kind of like, oh, like, she doesn't want Janzo to go, but like, I love the fact that you immediately have Rin being like, no, Janzo has to come, because like he has a way of seeing things from a different perspective, and then Janzo's just kind of like, oh, and she's like, don't let it go to your head, I'm still smarter than you, and it's like, oh, that's super sweet. It's like, fine, whatever you know, whatever he knows, you obviously know, but if you want to take him along, fine. And obviously Talon's like, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not letting Janzo go anywhere without me, but obviously Zed has to stay because he's the only one that can maintain this peace. So, but I thought it was interesting because it was super shady from the beginning when like Talon's like, what's that box? And it's like, and the moment it seems like Talon recognizes it, immediately Yuvala switches the subject. It's like, oh yeah, because that doesn't look super shady. So obviously, this is interesting because it's a very like Indiana Jones level type of episode. It's interesting because like obviously more recently there was a very Indiana Jones type of adventure episode of Lovecraft Country, so it's just interesting to have one on the Outpost. But it's like, oh yeah, like these ruins, there's traps, there's these keys to the doors. Obviously, like we're standing in a whole bunch of ash, but this sand and stuff we're standing in is actually ash from people that were burned. Janzo making a sacrifice, sticking his hand into the fire to make sure everybody could get out. It's like, and it's just like, well, he's like, I need to. And, Talon, talks about the fact that it's him doing something so stupid, but at the same time, it's still the thing of, that's what Janzo does. He always comes through in the end, does, what's necessary for everybody's sake. And Ren kind of taking care of him and stuff like that. And I thought that was kind of adorable. It was nice. She's like, it was brave yet super stupid, but it's like, you managed to save all of us. But obviously, Yuvala couldn't give it. She could care less because it's like, Janzo, who cares? Yeah, he literally saved the day, even though you started all this, because Janzo was like, yeah, this is kind of like a trap. We need to be careful. You set everything in motion, but she doesn't care. She's so, and that plays a big part into it because obviously they go from one trap to the next because now they're stuck in there with all that writing on the wall and they're like, okay, what does this mean? What's the open next pathway? Oh, great, we're running out of air. This sucks. But I also thought it was that cute moment between like, it's like, oh, what's this word? And then she's like, erection. And Janzo's like, excuse me? He stands up covering up his privates. And she's like, oh, the erection of like some tower or something. He's like, oh, that makes more sense. And she's like, are you okay? Could you look like you might be coming down? And it's like, it's super, like, it was already super obvious, but it's becoming more and more obvious. Like, he's super into her. And whether she won't admit it or not, she won't admit it, but he's, it's kind of like, before he found out about his sister situation, they were kind of the same way too. They kind of butted heads a little bit. But now you see it even in this situation because I think for Janzo, it's like someone who's smart like he is. And obviously it's like both of them being the geniuses that they are. Of course, they're going to butt heads. But it's like the back and forth that they have and everything. It's like, fine, we'll share the lab, I think that's, and the moment she was like, fine, you can have the whole lab back when I'm going, he's like, well, fine. But you can tell there was a little part of him that's like, oh, I don't want this to end because I like this. But they're running out of air and they can't figure out, I even love Janzo being like, oh, Talon, I always imagined me and you being stuck in a room together. Not like this circumstances, but it's like, luckily when the lights went out, the clues lit up and it's like, and that led to the next pathway, but obviously Janzo and Talon get locked on the other side, and then you kind of see more of Yuvala where she's willing to lead them behind. It's like, all right, Rin, well, we have to keep moving forward, but Rin's reluctant to lead them behind. He's like, no, you should just go, and she's like, oh, shut up, well, there has to be another way around this, and it's like, oh. And obviously what hits Rin, it's like finding out her mom was willing to leave her to die. It's like, she even says it like, oh, I would do, like, yeah, it's for the sake of our people. I am willing, and it's like, you would think as her daughter, that would mean something. I mean, granted, we don't know the depths of their relationship. Last episode kind of gave us a little bit of a hint when Yuvala showed up and she's like, oh, Mom, she stood to attention. It's like, it seems like it's a thing of like, well, your mom's this high priestess and everything. So that comes with a lot of stuff, but it seems like she's probably been there for other people. She's been there for their people, probably not as much for her. Because we haven't even gone into the whole conversation about, like, you know, obviously we're dealing with all this stuff with Talon's dad. What about hers? Because obviously, like, Talon was like, oh, I know what that box is from. It's from my dad. She's like, you remember it from your childhood? And it's like, yeah, my dad had that box, you know. So it's like, did you steal it from him? It's like, no, he gave it to me. Even saying that he died, you know, from a terrible disease. It was quickly, but I'm like, just Talon's taking it all like in stride. I feel like it's utter BS. I don't know, because a lot of that story's not making sense, because it's like, why would my mom lie about my dad? And it's like, is your dad actually still alive in the planes that they're just not saying anything? Because I mean, because I guess they don't want you to open up because obviously there's still so much they're not telling Talon, but like, is he still there? Is he potentially still alive? Like, why did her mom? Because maybe it was a self-sacrifice thing. Like, well, why? Because that's the thing. Why put him in a place where he'd be with the Black Fist and stuff like that? Because we already know they're sealed there. So, because they were saying like Talon's mom's the reason why he's there. So it's like, maybe that box is connected to like some dangerous stuff that no one should have access to. I mean, because that's the whole point. Because like the whole thing was like, yeah, make it, because, you know, eventually Genzo's kind of like, look at the test we were supposed to come across. Sacrifice, you know, was the solution to the first trial. The second trial was basically not abandoning. It's like, if Ivala had gone through that door, it would have killed all of them, because your greed would have been the downside to that, because you're supposed to stick together. But by sticking together and no one going through either side, it led to, like, because the whole thing, it's like, you know, life and death are the same thread. It's just about different perspectives. So it's like, you know, it kind of put them on opposite sides, and kind of it was meant to divide you. It was a test. So that's why I'm wondering, like, this whole thing, it's meant to not get this. Like, it's something so dangerous that maybe she sent him away to the Plains of Ash so that no one would ever get access to it. Maybe that's why he always kept distant from the others, because maybe they knew what it was and he needed to protect it. Maybe that was it. I don't know. Because we know that, like, there are, like, once again, I'm blanking, I'm forgetting how many Kenjis there were in general, but I don't know if you can have repeat Kenjis. Like, for example, if the mama that gave birth to the Kenj that Talon has, if it had another, would that other Kenj have the same ability? Or is it like, it seems like it's a one-off. It seems like every situation leads to one Kenj. There can never be like, oh, this thing gave birth to multiple Kenjis. Because I was wondering, could it be like the Kenj that the Kenj that Talon has came from, like, if there was another one like it, like, would it have the same ability, or would it be different, or is that possible? Once again, there's like so much to this we don't know the ins and outs to. Like, from what I remember in season 2, they didn't explain too much of that. It might be something they never fully tackle. It might be me just overthinking it, that it's like, oh, you're thinking too much about it. I'm just curious, because obviously, like, there were other, like, but Zed got the only one that was left in that particular temple last season, so maybe, like, there's only supposed to be 7 in, or I forgot the number. It's like 6 or 7 in general. The others are gone. Well, once again, we know that, like, 3 at the very least are in possession of the Prime Order, or at least, like, you know, the 3 have 3 of them. So, like I said, there's at least that. So, but regardless, tangents and all that. But when it's all said and done, like, we have that test, the final test, which is the very Indiana Jones, traps and everything. Talon's like, all right, I'm going to be the one doing this. Flipping, doing the badass thing, getting past all the traps and stuff like that. Like, it was, to me, what that reminded me of, it's not even Indiana Jones. That was some Prince of Persia shit right there, dude. Especially when she does some wall run. I'm like, fuck yeah. Like, it was definitely like some very, like, I'm sure, like, obviously, like, even Prince of Persia, I'm sure, kind of has a little bit of that, like, it definitely has, like, especially with, like, the puzzles and everything like that. It's very Indiana Jones in its own right in certain regards, but definitely it just, her dodging traps like that very much reminded me of Prince of Persia, which, you know, if you're unaware, I've talked about it. I am a fan of the franchise, regardless, tangents and all that. But that was pretty dope. But then we saw that snake, and I was scared for Talon, because I was like, oh, she didn't see it, but that snake there is going to bite her. But then luckily, like, Ivala comes over because even, Talon's like, maybe Ren should take it. You've been poisoned. You might die. Like, shouldn't it? But it's like, no, this is my burden to bear. And the snake bites her, because we never saw the mom, who gave birth to the Kenjis. So it's interesting to see, like, I'm wondering, is it that one specifically that's in form of a snake? Or were they all snakes that give birth to the Kenjis? Because, like I said, when Zed found his, it was just there. So I'm curious, like, how that, like, is it, like I said, is it this particular Kenj that's in the form of a snake or what? Maybe that's supposed to be symbolic to it being a serpent, because serpents are supposed to be, it's supposed to be kind of a representation of deceitful, obviously, like, if you want to get a little biblical, like, you look at, like, the Garden of Eden and stuff like that, serpent and everything, so it's supposed to be, serpents kind of represent, duplicitous and stuff like that. So maybe that kind of plays into stuff. We'll kind of get to that soon enough. But there's other storylines kind of bumping around. Obviously, we have like Mutt and Tobin spending time together. I thought was pretty dope. Mutt singing that song over and over again. But I thought it was kind of interesting, a little heart-to-heart they had, because like, he has the pipe and everything, but it's like, oh no, this is my mom's pipe. I want to give it to Aunt Gertie because I want her to at least have some to remember, because that was her sister. But also they had this whole conversation about how like Eleanor would like lock him up for like 3 days without having food, and obviously Tobin's like, oh yeah, like your Aunt Gertie would do the same thing to me as punishment. And he's like, oh yeah, they're sisters, so they're so similar. But he's like, yeah, but me and Janzo are brothers. And he's like, oh, maybe it's like a brothers are different while sisters are the same. At the same time, you have the whole situation with Zed trying to keep the peace until he finds out, oh, you're lying to me, Gwen. You're amassing an army. She's like, what are you talking about? It's like, well, why is it I can't find Tobin anywhere? She's like, I haven't been anywhere. Wrong. The night your dude died, as well as my cousin, ended up killing the dude and obviously ended up dying for it. But then she was like, yeah, your cousin died because he was a piece of shit. Kind of, obviously, she said it in a very much more eloquent way than I did. I said it in a very, like, tactless way. But Zed's not stupid. It's like, she's like, we had an agreement. He's like, yeah, I thought we did. But it's like, Zed's not stupid. He knows exactly what Gwen's up to, and Gwen's masterminding stuff, poisoning him, and it's like, yep. Until you call off your Lakiri off of Tobin, I'm not going to help you. But he's like, that thing, Vickers, it's like too far beyond the wall. I can't, like, it's a whistle. It doesn't automatically bring them back. Like, if he can't hear it, he can't hear it. So, but it's like, yeah, you have a day, because, it's like, now your fate's intertwined. If Tobin dies, you die. So I was like, ooh. Which, that's Gwen. She's willing to go above and beyond for the people she cares about. Because obviously, it's so interesting to compare. Like, obviously, it was kind of like an arranged marriage last season. But now it's like, no, they deeply love each other, too. And I just think that's kind of beautiful. I also love, like, Mutt and Tobin hunting that boar and everything, because they're both hungry. And then, like, Mutt the entire time is walking around eating. And I love Tobin, like, so, you've been here at that town enough. Do you know how they feel about me? He's like, oh no, he's like, I get the feeling like people didn't like me. He's like, no, I was drunk around a lot. I was kind of an ass. It's like, oh no, Mutt's not saying anything, but it's like, okay, truth be told is, they thought you were a huge ass, like huge. And he was like, thanks, Mutt. He's like, do you want to hear some of the stuff they said about you? I'm curious. I mean, it was all probably super negative. Because obviously, we've seen how much Tobin has grown since last season. Completely different person, reliable, willing to fight, isn't just a selfish prick that he was last season, so I thought that was just kind of interesting. But also, obviously, Vickers ends up catching up with them. Poor Tobin calling Mutt an idiot. He's like, well, I don't have any ideas. I'm an idiot. He's like, I'm sorry I called you an idiot, Mutt. But luckily, when it was all said and done, Mutt ended up saying, because I think in that moment, Mutt was just kind of, it was probably like, because obviously he was like, because Tobin had called him a hero earlier in the episode, and it's like, yeah, but if I'm such a hero, why couldn't I save my mom, And it's like, you can't save everyone. And obviously there's a whole thing, too, about, like, obviously Mutt's kind of gotten a little, like, obviously he witnessed so much death, he had to dispose of a lot of bodies, obviously losing his mom last season, it hit him and kind of makes him kind of, he's going a little Morgan from The Walking Dead-ish, where it seems like he doesn't want to be as violent, or at the very least he doesn't want to kill people. Obviously he, summon up the strength to knock that Lakiri back. But I think for him, it's just that moment of, like, probably thinking, like, oh, I don't want Tobin to die, this is my buddy, but also probably thinking, like, oh, I couldn't save my mom, but I can save Tobin. Granted, I'm wondering, did Vickers end up killing that dude that they got the horses from. We saw that dude kind of hiding a little bit, and the last thing we saw was just like the Kiri running in that direction. We don't know whether it decided to stop to kill that dude. I mean, it has its mission and its orders, but you still never know. So there's all of that. Then we kind of circle back around to the fact is that obviously they go there. It's like, all right, we're readying our forces, and I love that. Like even Tobin's like, what the hell is up with this? Because Mutt's talking to him, hey, they're like, Mutt, yeah, Mutt's the man, and it's like Tobin's almost looking like, what the hell? I'm back, but who do you talk to first? It's like Mutt, and you're tight with him. Okay, what the hell is this? It's like everyone, it's Mutt. Mutt's the dude. Mutt's the guy, But nevertheless. Circling back, Yuvala's kind of making her speech about the fact is that the Outpost will go back to being to the humans, and the Black Bloods are going to, it's like, I'm going to lead the charge on us reaching paradise. Because obviously, Talon was asking, like, okay, open a portal to this paradise in due time. It's like, the conditions need to be right. And you're like, what is that about? Because it's like, because even then Talon's like, what does that Kenj do? And it's like, oh, you'll see in time. And I'm like, that doesn't. Because like the moment she got the Kenj, it seemed like she changed. To be fair, it seemed like, Zed literally did the same thing too. What's interesting though, because as we know, Kenjas can't affect other Kenjas because Zed couldn't control Talon. So, but who knows? Maybe it's specific Kenjas can't control. Like maybe the one Yuvala has can control Talon. I doubt it because it seems like she's protected. But it's interesting at first because it's like also like the whole Gwen situation. Like, oh, Tobin's safe. Thank you for calling off your. The Curious, like, I didn't do that. Oh, well, Tobin's alive. Give me the antidote. Oh, there was no antidote. That was just something, like, Janzo had given me for, I forgot, like, she has, like, headaches or something like that. And he was like, you're so deceitful. And she's like, yeah, it takes a person to know a person. So it's like, oh. So that, anytime it seems like maybe there's a step forward, step back with the whole Zed and Gwen thing, for it just to be, every time there's a step forward, there's always like 2 or 3 steps back. The animosity, because both of them are trying to do what's best for their people. It's a very complicated situation where you're like, you feel like Zed isn't the bad guy that Gwen thinks he is. To be fair, she even says it herself. It's like, because he's like, oh, what did I do? Me and Vickers saved you, and what did you do? You exiled us. He's like, yeah, because I knew you were manipulating my friend Talon, and lo and behold, I was right the entire time. And it's like, so it's just, I think they're very similar in certain regards, and maybe that's why they bump heads. It is the thing of both of them wanting to do what's best for the people, whatever they have to do. And I think, Gwen, Rosalind, knows that better than anyone, being in a position, having lost her family, having lost so many people along the way. It's like, you make the hard choices that have to be made, and Zed's in a very similar situation, whether it be manipulating Talon, whether it be manipulating the people of the Outpost. I do what I need to do what's best for my people, much like Rosalind's doing everything she can for her people, Because obviously we got the whole conversation too about this ancient city where like humans and Black Bloods live together and everything. I'm curious to see what more comes about that temple. I guess that might have something to do with the paradise. Maybe not. I thought it was interesting though, like obviously like Yuvala's wanting to talk to Gwen, and then something happens, and then the Kenj seems like it's split. My thought was like, oh my god, does like this Kenj have a dark side to it? Is there a duality to this Kenj? But then she starts acting a little different, and then she touches Gwen, and I was like, oh, like, can you share this? Because part of me was wondering like, oh, that is it actually 2 different things? So like she has part of it, and like I was thinking like maybe she has part of it, and then Gwen has another part of it, and like maybe I was also thinking like maybe these Kenjas have a mind of their own, in the sense that one took over Yuvala, and this other one's about to take over Gwen, and the 2 most powerful people in this situation are under its control to a certain extent. I think this Kenj is kind of similar to Zed's. I think it has a mind control. Specifically, it's not the same thing like where Zed's is a full-blown mind control. This is a hive mind Kenj, that basically you get people under your spell and they become, it's like, oh, she's like, oh, I see what you see, I know what you know, I hear what you hear. And that's how she knew, like, being inside of Gwen's mind. She's like, oh, Garrett's still alive. Well, we can't let him run rampant for him to kill all the Nightbloods. We need to bring him into the fold. So it's basically like an infection you have to spread. What's interesting is this is season 3, right? This immediately, and I'm not trying to compare and contrast, but it just immediately came to my mind. It reminds me of the City of Light storyline from the 100, the whole alley situation. It reminds me of that, like you kind of get infected by it, and it seems like it's a very similar thing, especially it's about this paradise and stuff like that. So I'm wondering, is that what this paradise is? It's about controlling so many people's minds that they believe, like, are they actually working towards an actual paradise, or does this kid kind of does have a mind of its own and it wants something? I mean, maybe that's why this was so locked away, because it's so dangerous that no one can control it. In particular, maybe Yavala isn't strong enough to control it. Maybe you need, maybe Rin is a person that could probably pull this Kenji into, put it in. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see, but obviously we see Gwen and Yavala. It still seems like Yavala is Queen Bee, but it seems like it has taken control of her. And it's kind of almost like a Last of Us, with the spores, the fungus. It was all like the zombies in that universe are obviously like fungus spread. So maybe it's kind of like the infection is spreading almost like on the zombie level as well. Obviously with a little more, like I said, mind hive and intelligence to it. Whatever the case may be, this is definitely going to be interesting to see where this goes, especially, now that Gwen's under the control. Like I said, now both sides are going to be working together, but even though, like, there's animosity between everybody, this, how this all kind of ends up playing out, slowly but surely it's going to spread, and it becomes, like I said, two people, which is going to be interesting because the two people who can't be infected will be Zed and Talon, and then potentially having the entire outpost being, under their control, and obviously Tobin and Mutt out there getting help and amassing an army, especially if Rosalind's under this control, like what she can do, pointing them in a certain direction, that could be even more people under, that can make this an entire army, because we don't know how fast this thing could spread. Like, could you do multiple people at a time? Because even Zed can only do one person at a time with his mind control, so we'll ultimately have to wait and see. I'm really curious to see where all of this takes us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.